The forest was quiet in the way only deep wilderness could be, an ancient, resonant quiet that settled into the lungs and slowed the heart. The sky above the pine canopy glowed with the last light of late afternoon, the sun melting toward the horizon in molten streaks of amber and rose. Birds called to one another in soft, descending tones, and somewhere far off, the wind sighed through the evergreens like a breath exhaled from the earth itself. At the far edge of a still, deep lake tucked within the northern basin of a protected reserve in western Montana, a man knelt at the water's edge. His boots were sunk slightly in the damp, mossy soil. The sleeves of his flannel shirt rolled to the elbow, forearms lean and weathered from long days outdoors. His name was Eli Walker. He had been a veterinarian once, before the silence of certain rooms and the weight of irreversible outcomes had pushed him into the trees. Now, he was a volunteer, quietly, unofficially. He collected water samples, charted fish movement, recorded temperature variations. No one paid him. That was how he preferred it. His small metal case was open beside him, glinting faintly in the fading sun. Eli dipped a long-handled cylinder into the water, swirling it gently. The lake was unusually still that evening, glass-like. Even as the forest whispered. He found that unsettling. In the wild, too much stillness often meant something was wrong. He capped the sample, logged it in his notebook, and stood, stretching his back with a quiet groan. As he turned toward the trail leading back to his cabin, a faint shape in the water caught his eye. It was small, irregular, barely the size of a backpack. It bobbed just off the center of the lake, where the deeper water turned dark. At first, he thought it might be a log or a bundle of debris. But it was moving, slightly, floating, but not naturally, more like surrendering. He squinted, the light blurring his vision slightly as the sun ducked behind the ridge. Then he saw it. Fur. Eli's stomach tightened. The shape drifted closer on a slow current. It was an animal, small, feline, limbs hanging limp in the water, ears slicked back, nose barely above the surface. The kind of floating that didn't happen during sleep or play. The kind of stillness that came at the edge of dying. A bobcat. A cub. Maybe 10 weeks old. Alone. Eli hesitated only for a second. Just long enough for doubt to surface. It's already dead. Or close. Nothing to do. But then its ear twitched. Barely. A flicker, like a breath of wind through dry grass. He was moving before he realized it. He dropped his gear on the moss and stepped carefully into the water. Boots sinking into the lake bed with sucking resistance. The cold bit instantly, numbing his shins. He went slowly, cautious not to splash or startle. As he neared the bobcat, he knelt again, one hand outstretched. "Hey there," he whispered. "I've got you." The cub made no sound. Its eyes were closed, its body limp. But as Eli slid his arm gently under its chest and lifted, he felt the faintest quiver of breath. It was still alive. The weight of the tiny predator was shockingly light, wet fur, shallow bones, and not much else. Its coat was matted, muddy, tangled with lake weed. He cradled it against his chest, shielding it from the wind as he moved back toward shore. Once on dry ground, he wrapped the bobcat in his flannel overshirt and set it gently on a flat stone near his gear. The cub didn't stir. Eli crouched low, checking for signs of injury. There were no open wounds, but the pads of its paws were cracked and raw. Its ribs stood out like lines under the skin. It had been alone for days, maybe longer. Hunger, exhaustion, and now, waterlogged and near hypothermia. "You're stubborn," he murmured, "but you're here. That's something." He grabbed the emergency pouch from his case and pulled out a mylar blanket, wrapping it around the cub to preserve what heat remained. Then he took a small dropper and gently pressed it to the edge of the animal's mouth. A few drops of glucose solution dribbled in. The bobcat flinched, barely, but didn't resist. That was enough to make Eli's chest tighten. He worked in silence. The forest around him shifted into night. The birds falling quiet, replaced by the soft hum of insects and the creaking sigh of trees. The lake no longer reflected the sky. It drank it whole, becoming a void at the edge of the world. Eli didn't notice the cold until much later. He sat beside the cub, watching its tiny chest rise and fall, each breath shallower than the last. He had seen animals like this before, too far gone, brought in by well-meaning strangers with watery eyes and hopeful hands. Sometimes they pulled through, but most times, they didn't. And yet, something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the way it had drifted to him, as if chosen, as if some current deeper than water had carried it into his path. Or maybe it was simply that he couldn't bear to watch one more life fade without trying. His hands moved with practiced calm, old muscle memory from a past he hadn't entirely escaped. A warm cloth, a makeshift heating pad, gentle pulses of water and sugar. The night deepened. Above them, stars emerged, soft and uncountable. Time folded in. Then, just as his eyes began to sting with fatigue, the bobcat made a sound. It was the faintest rasp, like a breath pulled from a dry throat. A cough, then another. The cub's head turned, slowly, and one eye fluttered open. Eli froze. The pupil was cloudy, but the eye was alive. It blinked once, twice. "You're still with me," he whispered, leaning closer. "That's good. That's real good." The cub didn't move again. But it didn't fade, either. That night, Eli carried the small bundle wrapped in his shirt back to the cabin. He lit the wood stove, cleared space on the table, and set about doing what he hadn't done in years, nursing a life. Not for a paycheck, not for a protocol, but for the sheer and sacred necessity of it. The silence around him was no longer heavy. It breathed. And somewhere in that breathing silence, a tiny heartbeat began to steady, slowly, stubbornly, against the odds. Not every rescue was loud. Some came like a ripple in a still lake. And some, like this one, began with nothing more than a twitch of the ear. The cabin sat nestled in a small clearing, half hidden beneath the curve of pine trees, like it had grown there rather than been built. Its walls were worn but solid, patched over the years with scraps of salvaged lumber and memories too heavy to move. Inside, it smelled of cedar, smoke, And solitude, a quiet place. Not made for guests. Not made for anything soft or fragile. Yet now, in the center of Eli's kitchen table, lay something far more fragile than anything he'd let inside in years. The bobcat cub was barely breathing, wrapped in layers of flannel and one of his old military blankets. The small feline was little more than a husk, bones and damp fur. Curled loosely like it no longer remembered how to be alive. A heat lamp hummed above it, casting an amber glow over the table, and a hand towel warmed in a ceramic bowl beside it, rotated out every 20 minutes. Eli crouched beside the table, elbows on his knees, a plastic dropper held between his fingers like it was sacred. This wasn't like the rescues at the wildlife center years ago. Back then, he had equipment, protocol, a team. Now, it was just him and this little predator, two creatures left behind by the world. Each clinging to warmth in the heart of a place that barely remembered their names. The bobcat had no name when he pulled it from the water. But now it did. Ash. It had come to him as he peeled back the soaked, silt-caked fur and wiped the cub clean with a damp cloth. Its coat was a dulled gray, like the color of burned wood, like something touched by fire but not yet consumed. Ash, born of the wilderness, named in quiet. He dripped more sugar water between its lips, watching for a swallow, a twitch, anything. There was little movement, just the occasional ripple of breath, shallow and slow. Eli hadn't realized he was holding his breath until the bobcat gave a faint tremor. Not a seizure, not panic, just a ripple down the spine. A muscle remembering something. It wanted to fight. That was enough. He adjusted the heat lamp and sat back, glancing briefly at the clock. Nearly midnight. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, but he couldn't leave the table. Not yet. Not until he was sure. Years ago, when his daughter was still alive. He remembered spending a night like this, beside a hospital bed, watching a heart monitor instead of a ribcage. That night had ended in silence too, the kind that doesn't echo, just swallows. He closed his eyes. Not this time. Ash stirred slightly, a paw twitching beneath the blanket. Eli reached out, not to pet, he knew better, but to stabilize the heat pad. He made a soft sound in his throat. Not a word, but a vibration of comfort. Something instinctual. "You've got claws in you, little one," he murmured. "That's good. Keep them sharp." The snow hadn't come yet to the high mountains. But the air had that bite. He stoked the fire in the stove, careful not to let the room drop below safe temperature. The flames snapped and flickered, casting moving shadows across the cabin walls, dancing over the unmoving cub like ghostly guardians. Outside, the world slept. Owls glided overhead. Coyotes howled in the distance. And the trees whispered secrets to the stars. But in the cabin, everything hung suspended. Eli paced. He brewed coffee, didn't drink it. He read the same paragraph in a field guide 6 times. Never absorbed a word. And always, his eyes returned to the small body on the table. Ash didn't move again for hours. The clock hit 3:12 a.m. Eli's body ached from the stillness. He'd stayed in a half-crouched stance for too long. muscles locking, head buzzing from caffeine he never swallowed. But he didn't rest, couldn't. He'd made that mistake once. Sleeping for 40 minutes in a hospital chair while the monitors screamed a soft lullaby he didn't hear. Not again. Stay with me, he whispered. If you want out, you go on your feet. Ash twitched again. A breath. A noise. Something between a whimper and a gasp. Eli leaned closer, fingers brushing near the cub's head. The bobcat flinched, not away, but into the touch. Its nose lifted fractionally toward the heat of his palm. The first sign of consciousness. He felt something break loose in his chest, relief so sharp it almost hurt. Yeah, he breathed. That's it. Right here. You're not done yet. He brought another dropper, this time with electrolyte solution, and coaxed it into Ash's mouth. The bobcat swallowed, a weak, sloppy movement, but deliberate. That was enough for Eli to finally allow himself to sit. Not sleep, just sit. He remained beside the table, one arm resting on the wood, the other keeping time by feel, 20 minutes between heat compress rotations. 10 between feedings. His world had narrowed to the 4 legs of a table and the rhythm of another creature's breath. And somewhere in the growing light of dawn, as the sky began to tint silver and birds slowly reawakened, Ash stirred again, this time, when Eli touched his fingers to the edge of the blanket. The bobcat opened one eye fully, clouded. Still tired, but present, alive. It didn't growl, didn't flinch. It simply looked at him. And Eli, exhausted and worn and hollowed out by a decade of silence, looked back. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Eli whispered, "You came back." Ash closed its eye again. Not in defeat. In trust. Eli sat in silence, the weight of what had nearly happened settling onto him like snow. This was no ordinary night. This had been a choice, a decision between looking away and staying present, between fading out and stepping back in. He'd once lost everything in a moment he couldn't control. But this time, he had stayed. And maybe, just maybe, Ash had chosen to stay too. Morning spilled through the windows like quiet music. Soft and golden. The bobcat breathed. And Eli did too. The first time Ash tried to stand. It was barely more than a tremble. Eli had just finished swapping out the heat pads beneath the folded towel when the small bobcat gave a grunt, soft, hoarse, and pushed awkwardly with its front legs. Its tiny paws slipped against the cloth. Claws half retracted, more instinct than strength. But it was a movement. A will. A signal. Eli froze mid-motion, watching silently as Ash wobbled into a crouch. Then collapsed again in a tangle of limbs and frustration. "Well," Eli murmured with a faint smile. "You've got opinions now." Ash flicked an ear at the sound of his voice. Its eyes, once half-lidded and foggy, were open now, clearer, alert. Still rimmed with weakness but sharper. Smarter. That wild light had returned. Not feral. But aware. It was the 3rd day since the lake. In that time, Eli hadn't left the cabin for more than a few minutes at a time. His whole world had compressed into the walls of his one-room shelter, the stove. The battered table. The single chair where he slept in brief, crooked stretches. Everything was about Ash now. The feeding schedule had become clockwork, tiny portions of mashed fish broth, goat's milk, and later, soft raw meat from the freezer he'd used more for storing berries than anything animal. Ash ate from his hand. Not with aggression, but with need. The first time the cub licked the pad of his thumb by accident. Eli had felt a jolt of something he couldn't name. Connection. Maybe even reverence. Ash now slept not in the crate Eli had set up, but in a blanket nest in the corner near the stove. When the temperature dropped at night, it crept closer, once, even nudging under Eli's jacket when he dozed off in the chair. He'd woken to the surprising weight of it nestled against his ribs. Heartbeat fluttering steady and real. He hadn't moved, not even to breathe too loudly. By day 4, Ash followed his voice around the room, shifting its head toward each sound like it meant something. Maybe it did. Eli had started talking more, first out of habit, then because he wanted to. "You're the quiet kind," he said once, as he folded the blanket near Ash's nest. "That's all right. I've said enough for both of us anyway." Ash blinked at him. "Want to know a secret?" Eli sat down cross-legged nearby. "You're the first thing I've looked after in years that didn't end with an apology." He paused. Ash licked one paw, then let it fall limply over its nose. Eli kept talking, not to fill the silence, but because the silence no longer crushed him. It listened. Ash listened. He told the Bobcat about the city, about long shifts in clinics, about fluorescent lights and sounds that never stopped, about syringes and charts and bad news delivered too late. He told Ash about Rachel, his wife, her smile in the garden, the way she hummed in the morning like it was part of breathing, about their daughter, June, and how she used to wear mismatched socks because it made her feel like a superhero. He told Ash about the car accident, about the phone call that didn't feel real until the silence on the other end wouldn't go away, about the cabin, the wilderness, the trees that didn't ask for explanations. Ash didn't run, didn't shrink. Sometimes it yawned. Sometimes it curled closer, head against Eli's boot, but it stayed. And somehow, that made the story easier to tell. It wasn't just the caretaking anymore. Eli realized it one afternoon as he'd prepped meat strips on a plate and Ash, now strong enough to pad quietly across the floor, sat waiting at his feet, not growling, not demanding, just present. This wasn't just survival, it was trust. And one evening, when Eli placed the food down gently, Ash stepped forward, paused, and pressed its rough pink tongue once against the back of his hand. A lick, just a moment. Then it turned and began to eat. Eli didn't move. That one moment felt louder than all the words he'd spoken in the last week. Not because it was affection, not in the human sense, but because it was choice. Bobcats didn't show submission, they didn't beg, they didn't show gratitude, but Ash had chosen to make contact. It had chosen to acknowledge him. And in the language of a wild animal, that was as loud as love. Later that night, as the fire crackled low, Eli sat in the open doorway of the cabin. Ash curled up beside him on the wooden floor, tail tucked neatly along its flank. The sky was dark and high and endless. The stars came out slowly, patiently, like they always had. Eli exhaled. "Didn't think I'd get this again," he said quietly. Ash's ears twitched. "Didn't think I'd care. Really. But here you are. And I guess, so am I." The bobcat made a low sound in its throat, half purr, half sigh, and nudged against his arm. Eli let out something close to a laugh. Not loud, just real. He didn't know how long Ash would stay. Whether the cub would grow strong enough to return to the wild or whether it would remain, half wild, half something else. But he did know this. They had found each other when neither was supposed to survive. And somehow, that made everything feel possible again. Inside the cabin, the stove flickered warm light. Outside, the trees whispered their approval. And Eli, for the first time in years, felt like he was finally coming back to life. The air had changed, subtly, but unmistakably. It came first in the sound of the trees. The wind had shifted direction, bringing with it the cool breath of the higher mountains. Then came the light, longer mornings, sharper shadows. Even the birds had begun to sing differently, brighter, more alert, like something was stirring just beyond the treeline. Ash had changed too. The small, fragile cub that once huddled near the stove was now sinew and muscle, sleek fur and sharp instinct. Its paws, once too large for its own strength, now moved with silent confidence. The amber eyes had grown deeper, more focused, not on the floor beneath them, but on the forest beyond the cabin walls. Eli had been watching. It started with glances. Ash would sit at the window, ears forward, gaze fixed on the tree line. Then came the pauses during mealtime, when a distant rustle in the brush would draw its attention longer than the food. And finally, the dream chasing, Ash pacing near the door at dusk, tail flicking, breath held, as if the night itself was whispering promises just outside reach. Eli knew what it meant. Nature had begun calling her home. He hadn't said anything, not out loud. Instead, he sat longer on the porch, watched the shifting sky, and listened to the sounds of the world returning to motion. He remembered something an old wildlife biologist had once told him: "You don't own wild things. You only borrow time with them." Ash had stayed longer than he ever expected. But the debt was coming due. The night before, the forest had fallen quiet, one of those rare silences that comes when the wind stops moving and even the predators hold their breath. Ash had stood by the open window, nose twitching at the air. Her ears flicked toward the horizon, like she heard something Eli couldn't. That morning, he rose before the sun. He made coffee, black and too strong. He stirred the coals in the stove one last time and folded the blanket Ash had claimed as her nest. He set a strip of venison near the door, knowing it wouldn't be eaten. Then he opened the cabin door wide. The forest, just beyond the clearing, shimmered with early morning mist. Pine needles sparkled with dew. The path was invisible, but Ash would know it anyway. It was already inside her. Ash approached the threshold quietly, stepping out of shadow with the silence only a wildcat could master. She was bigger now, taller than his knee. Lean but powerful, every movement a sculpture of balance and grace. She paused at the open doorway, her body taut but not afraid. Eli didn't speak. Ash looked up at him. Eyes unreadable. The same eyes that had once fluttered half shut with fever now burned with something ancient and unbound. Then, without a sound, she stepped past the door. The earth was cool beneath her feet. She moved across the porch and down into the grass, each step deliberate. At the edge of the trees, she paused. She turned. Their eyes met, and for a moment that stretched longer than it had any right to. The world fell away. Eli felt it in his chest, a deep, quiet ache that didn't come from pain but from love. The kind of love that demands nothing, takes nothing, but costs everything. He had brought her back from the edge. And now she stood whole, alive, and free. Ash blinked once, slowly, then she turned and slipped into the forest. No cry, no whimper, just the sound of grass parting and branches brushing aside as she vanished into the wild that had called her from the beginning. Eli stood in the doorway for a long time. He listened for her, hoping maybe she'd pause just beyond the ridge. Give one last sound, one last sign, but there was nothing, only the forest returning to its rhythm, the birdsong rising, the wind picking up, the sun spilling softly through the trees. Ash was gone. He sat on the steps, mug in hand, and watched the trail as though she might reappear. She wouldn't, he knew that. Still, the watching felt like a kind of prayer. Loss came quietly, the same way healing had. It didn't knock, it didn't announce itself. It just arrived, wrapped in silence and sunlight and the shadow of paw prints in the grass. But what Eli felt wasn't grief. Not entirely. Yes, something had left him. But something greater had been returned to the world. Ash belonged out there, in the places where no names mattered, where her breath could rise and fall without the weight of walls. He had given her back to the wild, and in doing so, he had given himself something too. He hadn't saved her to keep her. He'd saved her so she could be what she was meant to be. And in a way, she had saved him too. Later that day, Eli cleaned the table, folded the blankets, and packed away the supplies he no longer needed. He left the door open a while longer, just in case. But as dusk fell, he closed it, not because he was waiting, but because he was ready. The fire crackled. The stars came out, and somewhere far off, a rustle in the trees might have been a bobcat, grown strong and wild, weaving her way through the night. He smiled. "Run far," he said to the darkness. And the wind carried the words away, as soft and sure as a heartbeat in the trees. The lake hadn't changed much since that day. The water still wore its quiet like a second skin, dark and smooth, untouched by the world beyond the trees. The sky, a soft blend of late summer gold and blue, mirrored off its surface in shimmering waves. Dragonflies darted in lazy loops. Somewhere nearby, a heron picked its way along the shallows. Eli knelt by the water's edge, boots planted in the damp soil, gloved hands steady as he lowered a vial into the lake. The routine hadn't changed, testing, logging, observing. After all these years, it still grounded him, a ritual, A conversation with the wild. Quiet and constant. He didn't think of Ash much anymore. Not in the way that hurt. At least, the ache had settled into something warm and steady. A memory that didn't sting. He carried it with him now. A soft reminder of what connection could be. Of what it meant to let go without regret. But as he capped the vial and stood, brushing dirt from his knees, a sound caught in his ears. A rustle. It was faint, like the wind slipping through the low brush. Nothing urgent, no snap of twigs or heavy tread. Just a gentle shift, intentional. Close. Eli turned, his heart already pausing. At first, he saw nothing, just the trees, the tall grass, the slope that curved upward to the ridge. Then she stepped out. From between two firs, a shape emerged, fluid, silent, unmistakable. A bobcat, larger now, almost full-grown. Her shoulders moved like water, her frame lean and strong. No longer the trembling thing he'd once cradled by firelight. Her coat had changed too, richer, darker, no longer matted by lake water and weakness. But her eyes, those amber eyes, still held the same light. Ash. Eli didn't move. He barely breathed. She stood there, not 10 yards away, her body relaxed but poised. She didn't flinch, didn't run, she simply looked at him. Ears forward, gaze locked. There was no need for recognition. He felt it, bone deep and absolute. It was her. Ash stepped forward once, slow and deliberate. She moved with the confidence of something that knew where it belonged. Not domesticated, not tame, but aware, and aware of him. Eli let out a slow breath. The sound almost a whisper. Ash paused a few feet away. Her tail low, body calm. She didn't approach to touch him, didn't nuzzle, didn't lick his hand like she had that one night so long ago. But she sat, right there, beside him, not close enough to reach. Just close enough to share the moment. They sat like that for a long time. No words passed between them. No need. Eli looked out over the water. Then back to her. The wind stirred the surface of the lake, sending soft ripples across the reflection of the sky. Ash's ears twitched once. Her nose lifted, testing the breeze. But still, she remained. It wasn't a visit made out of dependence. It wasn't even for him. It was a moment, a bridge, a thank you. She stayed long enough for the sun to shift behind a bank of clouds. For the wind to carry a new scent through the air. For the sky to begin changing color again. Then, as quietly as she'd come, Ash stood. She didn't glance back. She didn't need to. With 3 sure-footed steps, she melted into the brush. Her body swallowed by trees and mist and memory. Eli remained where he was, hand resting lightly on the log beside him, as though anchoring himself to the moment. A smile crept slowly across his face, small, but real. She had survived. She had returned. And she had chosen, just for a breath of time, to share the silence again. He picked up his notebook, flipping to a clean page. Instead of field notes, he wrote just one line. She remembers. As he packed up his tools and made his way back along the winding path through the woods, Eli felt lighter, not just in body, but in something deeper. In the quiet place grief used to live. That part of him had always feared letting go meant forgetting. But Ash had reminded him otherwise. Letting go had never meant erasing the bond. It had meant honoring it. Preserving its truth in the most natural way, by setting it free. And now, it lived on in every whisper of wind, every rustle of brush, every amber eye in the shadows of dusk. As the cabin came into view, lit by the soft light of the westering sun, Eli paused once, his eyes sweeping the horizon. There was no sign of Ash. But there didn't need to be. She had returned. And now, she belonged to the world again. As did he. And in that vast, wild world, between the fear of nature and the silence of grief, two lives had crossed, one seeking rescue, one seeking purpose. And in that brief moment, a bond was born, needing no words to last forever.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.